All morning before the tornado, it had rained. The day was dark and gloomy. The air was heavy. There was no wind.
Then the wind struck the school. The walls seemed to fall in all around us. Then the floor at one end of the building gave way.
It was so wide. Usually you think about a tornado, it has a funnel, and it may be a block or 2 or 3 blocks wide. But something about a mile wide, well, it just...
When the cloud, loaded with debris and tons of river mud, had passed over a slight rise of land to the east of the village, it left behind a landscape that passed beyond the bounds of despair into unreality.
Listen to the wind. Drifting past your senses is the fuel that fires the imagination. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Consider the element that floods into your lungs, the very same substance that long ago fanned an ancient spark, ignited by a primeval author, chiseling veiled petroglyphs across a dim cave wall. Carried on a breeze spanning eons, it was the breath that gave rise to dinosaurs, grew papyrus for paper, and dried vibrant oils brushed over canvas. It has since walked on the surface of the moon. It fondly recollects a childhood memory, violently reshapes the landscape of history, and blows away the fog surrounding the unknown. It rushes by in a heartbeat, inhaled at first, exhaled at last. One moment here, the next gone into thin air.
The crumbling skeleton of an old barn stands like a solitary monument, the only landmark for miles in every direction. Vast, rolling brown fields of dirt and tall grass unfold out into the distance for as far as the eye can see. The only distinction, the single flat line of a grass runway that crosses the field next to the barn. Standing high above the scene like a broken sentinel, the tattered remnant of a shredded windsock and the rusted framework that once supported it lean precariously over the edge of the roof, lashed to the front of the barn. A gust of wind rushes past and rustles the bits of fabric still clinging to the decayed metal frame. The protesting squeak of metal against metal cuts through the air as the windsock tugs uselessly at the corrosion-locked pole. Far below, and barely visible beneath the rotted timbers of the hayrack, the propeller and front fuselage of an old biplane can be seen poking out from beneath the ledge. Closer examination of the vintage aircraft reveals the obvious, the fact that it has been a very, very long time since these broken wings have taken to the sky. That they should never, ever do so again, there is little room for doubt. Now merely a hiding place for mice and a bountiful harvest for termites, the broken bird hides away and waits for these relentless invaders to take their toll, to reduce the once grand flying machine to a useless pile of discarded history. Down inside the weather-worn cockpit, a spider web covers the control panel and drapes between the stick and the broken glass face of the fuel gauge. Dust and a spattering of bird droppings coat the cracked seat cushion, upon which rests an old, leather-bound pilot's log book.
You've just uncovered a fragment of history. Documented within the pages of this book is an eyewitness account to one of the most destructive forces ever to descend upon the earth from the angry sky above. On March 18, 1925, a whirling vortex reached out like the finger of some cruel, elemental monster and ripped away a swath of humanity 3 states long, from Ellington, Missouri, to Petersburg, Indiana, effectively destroying everything that it touched, without regret or remorse. There. You hear that? That's the sound of oncoming thin air.
Carefully tucked away under the end paper of the logbook is a faded black and white photograph, a wedding picture. The man in this photograph is Mr. Trenton Somerset, one of those early wing and a prayer aviators they used to call a barnstormer. Trent and his Jenny biplane, Jenna Bell as he calls it, had an appointment of considerable import on that unseasonably warm March day that he was determined not to miss. March 18th, 1925 was to be his wedding day, and Trent was planning a grand entrance by buzzing the church upon his arrival there later that afternoon. Trent and his Jenna Bell lifted off into the wild, but not so blue yonder, at exactly the same time a swirling column of air was beginning to form, 3 miles behind his intended flight path. This is to be a flight path of destruction, a flight for survival. If someone were to climb down into the cockpit of this discarded aircraft, uncovering the abandoned fragment of a life now long since passed away, if the pages detailing Trenton Somerset's last flight are still legible beneath the discolored mildew that has long infiltrated the paper, then for the record, the adventure begins here, high above the rolling cornfields of Reynolds County, Missouri.
Jenna Bell is being a good girl today, rising up into a bank of wispy dark clouds like a bird itching to stretch her wings out. She's talking to me like she always does this time, her engine droning out a labored plea for me to think long and hard about my decision to cast her aside. Yes, sir, there's a hint of jealousy in her voice this time. She knows that she's been bested, now a playing second fiddle to my true love, my fiancée, Miss Paisley, Lucille Calhoun. No doubt the purtiest girl in all the 3 long states I'll be a traipsing across the blustery sky above. Protesting though she is, the stiff wind whistling past her fuselage today is one heck of a mean old zephyr for sure, loud enough to keep her monotonous, complaining to background noise, maybe even a tad unwise to be a flying through. Though I'll swear here and now that there ain't no wind powerful strong enough to keep me from getting to the church on time. And so, friends and neighbors, this is it. Took to the air at 12:45 this afternoon for a 4 o'clock arrival in Owensville, Indiana. I expect that Paisley will be fretting over my getting there on the hour, but then I had to take a crop dusting job over in Mansfield yesterday and didn't get finished up till close to sundown. I guess Paisley probably figures I'm just an old flyboy at heart, always got my head somewheres way up yonder in the clouds. What she hasn't seen yet is my practical side. When it comes to Paisley, my head might be in the clouds, but my feet are planted square down, good and solid on the ground. I plan on telling her after the ceremony concludes, after we's good and hitched, before the honeymoon has commenced. I bought a farm for the 2 of us to call home. Plenty of land to work and a big old house to live in. Dang, I love that girl. Hoping she'll be good and surprised. Jenna Bell's engine sputtered a smidge and I had to stop the daydreaming and give her a listen. Don't sound like nothing worrisome, just Jenna Bell's tummy rumbling 'cause she's getting hungry. I figure I'll get as far as Gorham, Illinois on the other side of the Mississippi River before refueling. Reckon I'll set her down round 1330 hours and top off her tank at Leroy's filling station. Pocket watch is reading 1:30 now, spot on. Sure enough, there's Leroy's place down below. Wind is picking up, but good. Better make this here a real quick stop. If I can keep out in front of this tailwind, I might just beat the preacher to the pulpit. Brought the Jenny down on a gravel road outside Gorham. Soon as I throttled back and cut power, we rolled on up to the pump, and I scuttled the cockpit, climbed on down, uncorked a wing tank, and commenced to fill her up. Whilst I stood there watching the gallons ticking off, I happened to look up and spy the ominous blackish-green storm clouds that was now a dogging me, hanging low and sinister-like on the horizon back where I come from.
Hey there, Trent.
Leroy, how the hell are you, you old ne'er-do-well? Just topping off the tanks. Looks like you got me for about $15 all told, give or take.
Fair enough. How's the old gal handling for you? Might bit breezy today, I'd say. So, Trent, when is you and Paisley supposed to be getting hitched up?
Well, sir, happy to say I'm on my way to the church directly. Planning on tying the knot yet this afternoon.
Ain't that something? I'll tell you what, if I didn't have 4 more oil changes backed up and a-waiting for me today, I'd be inclined to risk a little wing walking so's I could be there, present and accounted.
Leroy, every time I stop here in Gorham and I ask you if you want to take an airplane ride, you always drum up some scatterbrained excuse why you can't do it. Ain't nobody been waiting in line for an oil change here for more than 13 years, long as I've known you. Near as I can recollect, the last time I come through here, you told me you ain't never gonna lift them 2 feet of yours up off the ground any further than you can jump out from under a tire jack.
Ha ha. Well, now maybe I'll just bring along a couple bottles of my trusty elixir. 2 or 3 shots of rot gut, and I wouldn't care if you did 2 barrel rolls in a loop.
Leroy, you knows I can't fly moonshine across state lines. Liable to be spending my honeymoon in the big house. Tell you what, how about a blindfold, if you can't see how high you are?
I appreciate the thought, Somerset. Reckon I'll pass, at least for now. You and the little missus swing on by here sometime soon, and I'll have a wedding gift waiting for you. Go on now and get yourself married. If you're grounded for a spell on account of the honeymoon, don't fret it. I'll get up to see y'all one of these days.
Just as Leroy was a-finishing saying his goodbyes, a strong gust of wind blew his old oil-stained ball cap clean off his head and rolled it on down the road a piece.
Go on now and get. You better stay out ahead of this here storm. She's gonna be a doozy.
Leroy reached out and shook my hand. Thanks, my friend. You take care now.
Sure thing, bud.
I handed the old boy a wad of bills for the gasoline, gave the prop a hefty spin, climbed on back into the cockpit, throttled up the engine, and sent Jenabelle a rumbling and a bouncing back out on the road. The last thing I noticed as we commenced a rising skyward was Leroy's cap, whipping fiercely as it got all hung up in a tree. I watched on for a moment longer as he tugged the headgear off the limb and had just enough time to put it back on his noggin. Then, without nary a warning, a giant black funnel cloud touched down in the field just beyond the gas station. I saw Leroy slowly turn as the tornado slammed into the back of his garage, sending debris flying in all directions. A splintered 2x4 went sailing like a javelin, smack dab into one of the gas pumps, and the whole dang station exploded in a glowing orange fireball that swirled up into the center of the violently churning column of air. Didn't say nothing after that, nary a word, partly because I'd just lost myself a dear friend, partly because they weren't no time for last words or nothing like that. The twister was racing along the road in my direction, past the gas station, which by now was just a flat foundation completely engulfed in flames. My brain reeled as I put Jenna in a steep bank away from the funnel cloud, only to discover that the long rope-like vortex behind me was only one of 5 separate funnel clouds on the ground in and around the town of Gorham. I know it's an odd thought to have at a time like that, but I couldn't help but formulate the notion that this column of dust and debris looked for all the world like the center of a monstrous circus carousel, the wildly flailing cluster of funnel clouds dancing a counterclockwise waltz around the edges of the storm. Oh my dear God, no. Realizing that the storm was undoubtedly tracking along on the same course as I was, I started a fretting that it was going to become an uninvited guest at my wedding. Speak now or forever rest in peace. Right then and there, I decided I had me one singular task at hand to get myself there first and get my true love, the soon-to-be Mrs. Paisley Lucille Somerset, out of harm's way. A man on a mission now, I pointed the airplane away from Gorham and opened up the throttle. Shoving her stick all the way forward, I put Jenna Bell in a steep dive to pick up some speed as the lead tornado that hit the gas station roared up alongside. The funnel was careening wildly across the ground below, sending broken bits of a split rail fence into the dust-blackened air. Splinters of wood cut 2 jagged holes in the canvas of the left wing as I pulled out of the dive above a grove of high trees. Blinding bolts of lightning arced all around me, one of them even connected with Jenna Bell's vertical stabilizer and setting the old girl aglow with a little bit of St. Elmo's fire. Finally putting some distance betwixt me and the lead twister, I took in a deep breath and leveled off over a long green field of newly planted corn, the tiny sprouts swirling around in a counterclockwise dance as the storm winds approached. With a little more wiggle room on the control stick, I commenced to executing a wide bank, out from under the massive wall cloud and, oddly enough, out into a clutter of blue sky and broken clouds, far enough away from the tumult to breathe just a mite bit easier. With the swirling maelstrom now distant enough to keep from ripping my airplane to shreds, I glanced over at my compass and made sure I was still pointed toward Paisley, toward my rendezvous with destiny in that little chapel on the hill in Owensville. The notion was a happy one for sure, that is, until I decided to look back and see where the storm was a-headed. Damn it, I shouted, still hot on my tail. The boiling storm had already passed out into the rolling fields this side of Gorham. I expect there ain't much of anything left behind in the wake of that beast. My little errant wish for a happy ending to all of this darn near blew clean away in a blink of an eye. I was flying over a crossroads. For better, or for worse, like the preacher is fond of saying. The irony hit me like a punch in the jaw. Out ahead was where I wanted to be. Behind, seems that old Storm and me gone and done got ourselves intertwined somehow. Like we's traveling companions now, or maybe in a race towards some kind of finish line. Tipping her wings over a smidge to keep her flying straight and true, I took a long look downward and spotted something I sure as hell never expected to see, never imagined. Skipping alone on the gravel shoulder alongside a long black band of asphalt road was a little girl. The wind was already a-whipping up all around her, tugging at her dress and flinging her pigtails up off her shoulders. She was toting a sizable armload of books, all tied up together in a leather strap, probably in the middle of walking herself home from a schoolhouse. Nearest farm had to be more than 5 miles distance on down the road, in the direction she was heading herself toward. Maybe not altogether awares of the urgency to take shelter from the storm that was rapidly barreling down upon her. Much to my lament, I could already see she weren't gonna make it anywhere safe in time. "Dang if and she ain't in a tight spot," I exclaimed. Without nary a thought about my odds of success, I throttled back and lined up o'er the road out ahead of her and set old Jenna Bell down on the blacktop. My wheels hadn't even finished rolling to a stop when I bounded out of the cockpit and jumped to the ground, running up to the little girl and kneeling down in front of her. "What's your name, little miss?" I asked.
My name is Gail Hickory, sir, and I'm 7.5 years old.
Gesturing back o'er her shoulder, she added,
My teacher, Mrs. Mabel, sent all us kids home on account of that bad old storm back yonder.
"So's I figured," I told her. "My name's Trenton Somerset. I seen y'all skipping along down here and figured I'd help you get home safe and sound. You ever take an airplane ride, young lady?"
No, sir, I haven't.
She responded.
Mama and Daddy told me never to take any rides from strangers.
"Good advice," I replied. "I reckon they ain't too many folks that look much stranger than me, what with my kooky old goggles, flyer's cap, and scarf, but, my dear, I tells you true, I got your welfare at heart. Promise you, Gail, I'm harmless enough. Besides, ain't got the time nor the inclination to kidnap nobody. I gotta fly all the way to Indiana by 4 o'clock this afternoon so's I can get married. In other words, I'm in an awful big hurry. That said, Storm will be here directly, and you need to be back in the loving arms of your mama and your daddy by then. That your house out ahead there a piece?"
Yep,
she said.
and that big old red barn, too.
I looked up behind her and saw that the wall cloud was closing in fast, with at least 2 of the wildly careening cyclones looming out of the inky blackness. "Jenna Bell, that's my airplane here. She's got 2 seats, one for me to fly her in and one of them all set aside for a fine young lady such as yourself. Let me take them hefty school books off your hands and we'll get y'all situated." The child nodded trustingly and held out her arms. Without a moment to lose, I took her books, then picked her up, sprinting back behind the wing and hoisted her into the guest chair. "There's a pair of these same funny goggles on your chair in there," I told her. "I want you to put them on for me and then hold on real tight. Old Jenna Bell will have y'all back home lickety-split." Gail nodded again and slid the oversized eye protection down on her face. "There," I said, tasseling her hair. "Now you look even stranger than I do." Warmed my heart that I managed to coax a smile, even at a time like this. With my VIP passenger safely tucked away, I focused on getting back behind the controls and getting us both airborne. I never did shut down the engine this time, for fear they wasn't going to be near enough time to hand prop start her again. A few seconds after throttle up, the ragged clouds reached out high up overhead and started blotting out the sun. As the surrounding landscape fell into an eerie, unnatural darkness, and a wicked old tailwind kicked us forward like an angry mule, Jenna's gear nearly slipped clean off into the ditch next to the road, while I fought back with everything I had to get us aloft and then maintain level flight. Thankfully, the young Miss Hickory was too short-statured to see the destruction being carried along past my wingtips. Wouldn't be tall surprised if in some of that splintered debris were all of what's left of her schoolhouse. Like an invisible wall of destruction in our wake, broken shards, most likely all that remained of Gorham, was threatening to rip the canvas limb from limb as we tried desperately to make our escape. Fighting darn near as hard to stay focused on the moment as I was at flying my airplane. I pulled back on the stick to give us some altitude and then banked hard over toward the Hickory farm, surveying the layout for any sizable piece of flat land near enough to the family storm shelter. settling on a stretch, a gravel driveway leading right past the cellar door embankment. I did my best, under the blustery circumstances, to put Jenna Bell in a proper glide path down, careful not to get her hung up in a tree or all tangled in a bundle of telephone wires. "Come on now," I said under my breath. "Let's make this count, old girl. Get this child down safe and sound." Bucking all the way in turbulence that no sane pilot should ever have to fly through, I headed for my chosen target to the exclusion of all else. I knew I was only going to get one chance at this. A hefty downdraft slapped Jenna's tires down hard into the pea gravel. Not my smoothest landing, but certainly adequate enough under the circumstance. Soon as Jenna Bell was stationary, I hurried to the passenger seat, hoisted the little hickory girl out and set her down on the wing, then leaped to the ground myself. Without a second to lose, I carried her to the storm cellar and then pounded good and hard on the old wooden door. "Open up," I shouted. "Got your little Miss Gail Hickory out here, and she's a needing shelter pronto." The rumble of the approaching twister was getting louder. I knew I was a-running awful dang low on time. I gave the door handle a purty, substantial yank, confirming that the cellar was sealed and occupied, then felt the vibration of a sturdy bolt being unlocked from within. Soon as the door swung aside, Gail shouted,
"Daddy!"
With no time for long goodbyes, I passed the child down into the arms of her father. I'll get her school books back to her when it ain't quite so windy out here. I saw a teardrop welling up in the man's eye. I couldn't hear him over Jenna's engine clatter and the roar of the angry wind, but I could clearly read his lips. "Thank you," he said. "Keep her safe," I replied. "She's one brave little girl." That said, it was time for me to fly. After helping Papa Hickory to close and lock the cellar door, I sprinted back to Jenna and piled in. "Wing and a prayer, my dear. Let's get ourselves vamoosed." Shoving the throttle wide open, I stirred up a big old backwash as my airplane lumbered down the driveway, picking up speed, on a collision course with the Hickory family's big red barn at the end of the lane. Whether it was fate, destiny, divine intervention, or just good old-fashioned dumb luck, the storm chose that particular moment to clear me a way through. A long, sinuous rope funnel cloud dropped down out of some low-hanging clutter overhead, whipping around like a big old angry snake in the grass that struck the barn broadside and swept it clean away as I flew on by in the aftermath. "Dang!" I shouted as I watched the broken barn get tossed into the adjacent field. "Hope the Hickorys turned their livestock loose before they went underground." Way too close for comfort, I veered off in the opposite direction of the big old sidewinder, and with my compass as my guide, pointed Jenna's nose back at my destination. That's when I first realized I was just now flying on over the outskirts of Murfreesboro, Illinois. I realized the implications. I knew that every one of those poor souls down below had no warning, had no idea what was now setting its awful sights upon them. Dipping my Lady Bell to just above the rooftops, I rocked the wings and tried my best to attract attention overhead. My heart sank when I saw that, for the most part, folks was a-looking up, smiling and a-waving at me, not seeing my close pass as a warning at all. "Take cover," I shouted to no avail, certainly inaudible under the grumble of Jenny's engine. The wall cloud was already rolling in behind me. They weren't no time for a landing, leastwise not without sealing my own fate as well. I said a silent prayer for the town's unsuspecting populace, knowing full well what they was about to endure, then soared on out of the northeastern city limits. In the back of my mind, I knew that Murfreesboro weren't going to be the only township in the damaged path. Next up, and not all that much further ahead, was DeSoto. Yet another sizable population with precious little time to save themselves. Then and there, I decided I had to try something a tad more radical and a whole lot more risky to save a few more folks here in DeSoto. Spying what seemed to be a wide thoroughfare leading straight on into the center of town, I crossed my fingers and took her down, barking the tires on the asphalt right out front, a town hall. As y'all might expect, landing an airplane on small-town Main Street attracted a whole bunch of attention. I cut power and rolled to a stop, and in no time, excited folks started congregating all around Jenna's wings and fuselage. I stood up high on the cockpit seat and waved my arms frantically. "Everyone," I shouted, "listen to me. There's a big old storm bearing down on your town. It's gonna be here directly. I need y'all to go take cover right now. Go now. Ain't no time to be a gawking at my airplane. Save yourselves." It didn't take long to clear the street. People ran screaming and hollering in all directions, and thankfully spreading the word as they did so. A loud crack of thunder jolted me back from the euphoria I was a-feeling, hoping I'd just saved a whole parcel of folks. As I started climbing down to go spin the propeller, my foot got hung up on the lip of the cockpit ledge and caused me to stumble the rest of the way down to the road. To my panicked alarm, Paisley's wedding ring flipped out of my pocket and rolled away, as luck would have it, straight down into a storm drain on the edge of the curb. My heart sank. "Oh no," I exclaimed, as I sprinted over to the cast iron grate and looked in through the slats. There it rested, gleaming up at me and out of reach. Then I felt a raindrop splash against the back of my neck. Then another, splattering across my hand. "I can't show up at the ceremony without the ring," I exclaimed. Quickly surveying the situation, I saw that a torrential downpour was coming, in fact, would be here at any moment. Knowing full well that the ring was lost, if I didn't work fast, I focused my gaze on the road and spotted a nearby manhole cover. More raindrops were pelting me as I bounded over and started tugging frantically on the rust-caked cover, calculating all the while that if I did manage to uncap this hole, I still had to crawl through who knows what to reach the drain and snatch up the ring. Bringing to bear every ounce of muscle I could muster, the cover finally gave way with a grinding metal-on-metal protest, and I quickly climbed down into the concrete pipe and started inching my way towards the nearest light source, hopefully the ledge beneath the grate where the ring had come to rest. Didn't carry no matches or nothing, so yeah, it was good and dark down there. Several times along the way, I stuck my hands into something thick and sticky, but then the revulsion I felt about it paled by comparison to the urgency of getting Paisley's ring back. About 10 feet to go, I heard the rain arrive, loud and heavy. All that water was going to be flooding this here pipe any second, probably washing my token of love away for good and all in the process. 5 feet to go, stuck my face in a big old spider web, and felt the nasty little critter crawling its way down under the collar of my flight jacket. I could hear the gurgling and the gushing as the pipe commenced to filling up, already trickling off the storm drain ledge. Finally, I reached up and started carefully poking and grasping until my fingers lightly brushed against the tiny gold band. "Gotcha!" I hollered. Quickly pocketing my priceless little treasure, I headed on back the way I came from, now a sloshing hip-deep in the rising rainwater. With the slick coat of algae underfoot, it was getting downright difficult to keep from slip-sliding my way downstream and ending up face down at the bottom of the nearest creek bed. Finally making my way back to the manhole, I hoisted myself out of the opening and ran to Jenna, ready to give the propeller a good spin. She started up without a hitch. The heavy downpour was a-soaking me to the core to be sure. But when the first hailstone struck me square on my noggin, I panicked. It weren't gonna take no time at all before them chunks of ice finished the job at permanently grounding the old girl. Another marble-sized nugget pelted the fuselage right in front of me and splashed up water on my goggles, making it downright hard to see where I was a-going. Peeling off the headgear, I roared on down the empty street trying to get airborne. Each and every second I spent here on the ground in DeSoto was a roll of the dice, and I weren't about to let the game turn up snake eyes. Yanking back hard on the control stick, I coaxed Jenna above the row of downtown buildings and then veered off over the marquee of the local movie house to avoid flying straight on into the storm. From my lofted vantage point, I could easily see the twister that was on the ground now. A monstrous, swirling pillar of destruction more than a mile wide that was effectively swallowing everything in its way. DeSoto was in its way. Figuring I'd done everything I could here and then some, I banked hard over and proceeded back towards Owensville. West Frankfort and Parrish, two small mining towns northeast of DeSoto, stood out ahead. With not much more than a 5-minute head start, I soared along the wide-open countryside toward the largest visible landmark, a tall silver frame capped with a substantial tank, the Orient Coal Mine Water Tower. I'd already witnessed firsthand the futility of a low pass overhead in Murfreesboro, but then I knowed full well there weren't time enough for a landing to go a-running and a shouting through the streets neither. Opting for several overflights that I reckon might get the citizenry to at least turn their collective gazes skyward, I done everything I could think of to draw attention to myself, from rocking the wings wildly to pumping the throttle open and shut, choking Jenna's raucous grumbling and giving her a good case of the hiccups, loud echoing backfires that must have sounded like gunshots ringing out overhead. Sure enough, lots of people come to give me a look, and as a result got a good long gander at the angry clouds rolling on in. This time, folks weren't pointing up at my aircraft, but instead was telling each other to take cover. Still, didn't appear to me that them little houses down there was gonna offer much in the way of protection. Something else I noticed too, that some, if not all, of the citizenry running for safety was comprised of just the women and the children. Then it dawned on me that all the menfolk was probably already safe and sound working their shift down deep in the coal mines. So much for women and children first. Damn it all to hell, I shouted. They got the best damn place on earth to shield them from this beast. But them poor ladies and their young'uns most likely don't even know the way in. My anger at the thought had me continuing to crisscross the increasingly dangerous airspace for maybe just a mite too long. As I banked back around, hard over for a close fly by the water tower, the prevailing winds caught me and Jenna completely off guard. The giant twister was already here, a column of debris and destruction so wide I couldn't even discern an outer edge to the darn thing. At almost the same exact moment I executed my little bit of aerobatic madness, the supporting superstructure of the tower crumpled and twisted in on itself, and that big old can of water up top started toppling down upon me. Jenna's tail end just barely cleared the tank as it pitched on over and dropped with a loud crash into a big pile of mining gear below. Convinced now that any other course of action here was nothing but a lost cause at best, I pulled out of the dive and yanked the control stick hard over, veering away from that big old behemoth and putting some safe distance from her between us. We's getting awful dang close to the end of the line now, and there ain't nothing left to do but get me to the church on time. The twister was picking up speed and making it downright difficult to stay out ahead of it. Parrish was next out yonder in the mile-wide path, and they weren't nothing I could do this time without getting myself sucked on up in the eye of the storm. I remember thinking as I passed by overhead the irony that was this town called Parrish. I said a prayer for 'em all nonetheless. They's all gonna need a little divine intervention real soon. By this time, I couldn't even begin to wrap my head around the loss of life. Don't seem right at all that such a thing could get set loose on all these unfortunate, unsuspecting folks. Kinda makes you wonder some about the powers that be. That is, if and I had time to be a wondering about anything but staying alive. Jenna Bell's max speed tops out at somewheres around 75 miles an hour, and dang if and that old twister wasn't doing one hell of a job at keeping up. Thankfully, there's a whole bunch of wide open spaces up ahead now, leastwise, till we gets to the state line, crossing the Wabash River. You'd think that by now, this here storm would have been spent. Ain't never seen nor heard tell of any awful twister on the ground like this, tear-assing across 3 whole states. The dang thing's gotta peter out sometime, don't it? I suppose that's what you might call a rhetorical question after all. The storm don't seem to be weakening nary one iota. The wicked old thing was a barreling along hard and fast now, its hunger for destruction showing no sign of getting its fill. She's got the old Wabash in her sights now, directly. I guess that twister is getting mighty thirsty. Needed something to wash down everything it's done gone and in. Soon as the funnel cloud hit the bank on the Illinois side, she started a hissing and a gurgling, churning up water and spraying it on back out in every direction. The torrential rush that rained down from overhead started soaking Jenna and me, but good. Enough that a substantial puddle of water was collected neath the rudder pedals and sloshing round underfoot as I kept on fighting against the buffeting winds. The entire surface of the twister started transforming right before my eyes as the beast whirled out across the water, the dust-brown coloration suddenly becoming like a shimmering pillar, a transparent mist that reflected the late afternoon sunlight. Don't make no never mind of me. Like that old Shakespeare feller said, the devil hath the power to assume a pleasing shape. Speaking of that old devil, I seen what he had his sights set on next, and it sure as hell had my blood running cold as ice. A little Indiana town by the name of Griffin was now visible through the spattered glass of my curved cockpit visor. Long about now, school must have been concluded for the day in Griffin, as evident by way of an old yellow and black bus that was a lumbering this way towards a farm at the end of a long dirt road. "No!" I shouted. "No, not anymore! For the love of God, turn back!" A rickety old jalopy stopped at the end of the lane next to a rusty mailbox affixed to the fence post, and the bus driver casually slid open the door and stepped outside. I don't imagine he even noticed as Jenna Bell roared on by overhead. I was close enough to see that he was just a-standing there, rigid as a statue, staring back at the twister that was past the river now and ripping its way out across the field faster than a runaway train. I wept loud and hard as I looked back and saw the school bus get lifted high into the air and then slung back down to the ground like a child's toy, mangled almost beyond recognition. The driver gone, apparently just whisked away like flicking a fly off your arm to who knows where. As the storm reached the outskirts of Griffin, I saw that the boiling wall cloud had once again spawned more twisters on the ground, 2 more separate and distinct funnel clouds joining in a dance of death, the trio of grim reapers now wiping the little community of Griffin clean off the map. Then suddenly I realized I had flown myself smack dab into the core. I'd been so razor focused on the calamity of the school bus unfolding down below me that I soared straight on in over Griffin, and consequently right in betwixt all 3 of them mean old whirlwinds. Worse yet, I see now that they's all starting to converge, whipping round towards one another, with yours truly getting sandwiched up inside like a daggone hot dog inside a bun. And any one of those raging convulsions of air was to so much as brush against Jenna's flimsy wingtips, I was gonna be a goner for sure. Most tragic of all, amid the chaos, was that I just then spotted Owensville through the tumbling mire, On t'other side, that impassable wall of wind, all spread out ahead like a sacrificial lamb about to be snuffed out like a candle in the wind. Paisley was down there, unsuspecting such as she was, that her ever-lovin' was a-riding into town, high up in the saddle of the nightmare that was to be the instrument of her demise. "I'll be damned if and that's how this is gonna play out," I shouted. As the triple vortexes spiraled in closer and closer, I went ahead and decided to throw caution to the wind. Hell, more like clean out the door. "Don't think on it so long, you pitiful bastard. Just go on ahead and do it." That said, I executed the wildest last-ditch maneuver of my illustrious hot-dogging, barnstorming career. I kicked old Jenna Bell in her canvas-covered ass and ratcheted her to full throttle, then pulled back on the stick so damned hard it nearly broke the control clean off in my hands. Yeehaw! Much to my surprise, my girl did what she was told, heading vertical like a screaming bat straight out of hell, propelled more by the updraft now than by the gnashing pistons of Jenna's own labored 90-horsepower plant. We commenced to accelerating toward the underbelly of the wall cloud, picking up speed all the while, till I figured she's gonna get shredded down to just little old me flying upstairs with a busted-off stick clenched in my cold, dead hands. Oddly, my presumed situation turned out not to be how I had it pegged after all. Unceasing bolts of supercharged electricity zigged in a zag side to side, arcing betwixt the inner lining of the violently rotating vortexes, discharging against the cavorting funnel cloud walls and lighting the spaces betwixt them in an eerie, cobalt blue glow. Just as y'all might suspect, the room I had to wiggle round in fanned out as we approached the highest reaches, wide on top like a tutti-frutti ice cream cone. Everywhere around the lofted heights were clusters of little tornadoes, twisting around like babies in their mama's belly. Started getting real hard to catch my breath. The further up I got, sure as hell not the recommended altitude spelled out in the JN4 owner's manual. "All right, Trenton," I told myself, "you done got yourself lofted. Now it all comes down to chance." Leveling off in the clutter beneath the wall cloud, I flew round the inner perimeter of the funnels as they kept on collapsing in towards me. Damned if and I didn't feel like the roulette pill on a big old wheel. Sure as hell hope this game of chance don't come up black 13. Decided they's really only one way to thread myself out through the eye of this here needle. Same direction that gone and led me all the way here in the first place. Paisley. Sure did make this here decision powerful easy. No calculated geometries to figure them gaps between the twisters. No pontificating to figure the widest way through. Just set my sights on Paisley and imagine myself flying straight on into her loving arms. Long time ago, I'd made up my mind to put my life in her hands anyhow. Reckon now's the time to put that love to the test. Flaps up, stick back, throttle wide open, leaning on over into a hammerhead stall. "Hang on, darling. I'm a-comin' to save you." Jenna laid back dutifully, then started a-falling like a rock, riding the raging tempest faster and faster till she passed up the needle on the old airspeed gauge. Sailing down like we's quicksilver, I banked hard over and lunged at the tornado closest to the northeasterly position. Jenna's left wing came within no more than a foot or two of getting, all caught up in the gyrations, and then an odd thing happened. Real odd. You know, that old dumb luck, divine intervention thing? The storm shifted its track, and we squeaked out seconds before all three vortexes converged. The storm still rolled on through the outskirts of Owensville, but on account of the shift, missed the church on the south side of town by a comfortable margin. I had just enough petrol remaining to buzz the steeple one pass, and then Jenna ran her tank dry, and I ended up dead sticking down on the field behind the chapel 5 minutes early. The tri-state tornado, as it came to be known, continued on a path of destruction into Princeton, Indiana, then thankfully got itself dissipated shortly thereafter, spun itself off into thin air. Even more folks died in the tragic wake, and the resulting event blew its awful way into the history books as the single worst, most deadly tornado in history. As for me, well, sir, as you probably already surmised, Paisley and me got ourselves wedlocked. Funny thing, we standing up there on the altar in front of God, friends and relatives, you know, the usual situation. We had both just finished saying our vows, all them I do's and such, when that dang spider from the storm drain in DeSoto chose that particular moment to make its debut. The big old creepy crawler skittered out from under my coat and then stood motionless on the crux of my arm. Startled, I barked out a pitiful little holler and then shook the ugly bastard off on the floor, at which point Paisley promptly hauled off and squashed it underneath the heel of one of her pearly white pumps. "Sorry about that," I said with a sheepish little grin. "Weren't my intent to bring that long-legged feller to our wedding." The preacher gave me permission to go ahead and kiss my lovely bride, which, of course, I done did. As we stood there hugging on one another, Paisley leaned in close and chided.
"It's all right, honey,"
she told me.
"You're safe now. Although surely it was a good thing I's here to come to your rescue, Mr. Somerset."
I chuckled a smidge under my breath and looked back deep into my ever-lovin's eyes. "Yes, indeed, Mrs. Somerset," I replied. "It most certainly is a real good thing."
To quote L. Frank Baum, author that penned The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, "I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore." Of course, in this case, he was absolutely right. In fact, we never were in Kansas, were we? For Trenton Somerset, Barnstormer, the winds of change led him straight and true to where he needed to be the most, the arms of the one he loves. He was one of the fortunate. In the final analysis, dear friends, the storm came from out of nowhere. It swept away lives. It reshaped the landscape. It left total destruction in its wake. And then it was gone into thin air.
Never saw the sun shining so bright, never saw things going so right. Noticing the days hardly by, when you're in love, my how they fly. Blue days, all of them gone, nothing but blue skies from now on.
Episode 30 of the Thin Air Podcast Anthology, Barnstormer, was written for audio by R.J. Lonsdale. The program was produced, directed, narrated, and told by R.J. Lonsdale. The voice of the storyteller was performed by Richard Warwick. The voice of Trenton Somerset was performed by Robert Riggs. Leroy by Wyatt Reynolds. Gail Hickory by Hallie Grayland. And Miss Paisley, Lucille Calhoun by Nishalia Levine. Audio production for this Thin Air episode by R.J. Lonsdale of Flyby Studios. Music compositions used in this episode include Martian Cowboy by Kevin MacLeod, A Kind of Hope by Scott Buckley, Beginning to End by Handy Amp Studios, Death May Die, Darkness and Light, Tremolo for Two, Limitless, The Immortalist, Vindication, The Demand of Man, Heart of Darkness, Our Reckoning, The Untold and Unbreakable by Secession Studios, and Blue Skies by Irving Berlin, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0. This has been an R.J. Lonsdale Flyby Studios presentation.